Hi, and welcome to the Dr. Coffee Podcast, your weekly blend of motivation, encouragement, education, and insight into all things medicine for junior doctors and medical students in South Africa. My name is Simon Fraser, and I'm a second-year intern doctor at Charlotte Macgregor Johannesburg Academic Hospital. I started the Dr. Coffee Podcast last year to broaden my knowledge and understanding of the incredible world of medicine and surgery and the variety of subspecialties and disciplines that exist within them. I don't know about you, but as soon as I got into medical school, my family and friends, and even some complete strangers actually, would ask me what I wanted to specialize in. And while in the beginning I thought I had some idea of the direction I wanted to take, I soon realized that as a medical student, you have almost no clue of what each subspec is really like. The best way that I've heard this framed is by one of my classmates who said that it's analogous to going to a restaurant without being able to study the menu. It's kind of like you go into the restaurant and you know that they'll serve fish, beef, chicken and vegetarian options with a variety of spices and flavors, but you don't really know what each dish contains. You don't know the price, you don't know the portion, you don't know how spicy it's going to be, and that's a lot like what it is to be a medical student. When you're a medical student, you don't necessarily know the hours, you don't know the goods and the bads of each subspec, and that's why the Dr. Coffee Podcast entered the picture. Each week's episode features an interview with a consultant or a senior registrar in a specialty requested by the Dr. Coffee audience, or a topical episode that's applicable and helpful to our audience of junior doctors and medical students. You're invited to learn and grow with me as I discover the perks, pitfalls, and perils of specializing in and practicing medicine in our beautiful country. As promised in episode 23, I'm pleased to make a special introduction to a new member of the Dr. Coffee Podcast team. I first met her when she was an intern doctor and I was a final year student in pediatrics. She graduated from UFS in 2020 and she's currently a ComServe doctor in Limpopo. With a flair for humor, a knack for social media, and eminently cooler than me, I'm sure you're going to love what she brings to the podcast. She's none other than Dr. Knox Mpambukeli, and she'll be managing the social media accounts of the Dr. Coffee Podcast, as well as generating new content to bless your feed. You can follow her on Instagram and TikTok with the username at Knox_Kelly, that's Keli. Welcome, Knox, and it's awesome to have you on board. It's now time for our first Stories from Medical History slot. And I'd like to kick off this segment with a well-known story that's as wild as it is absolutely true. Dr. Leonid Rogozov was a Soviet general practitioner who took part in the 6th Soviet expedition to Antarctica. He was the only doctor stationed at the newly constructed Novolazarevskaya station, and while there, developed appendicitis, which meant he had to perform an appendectomy on himself. On the morning of the 29th of April 1961, Dr. Rogozov awoke with generalized weakness, nausea, fever, and pain that gradually localized to the lower right quadrant of his abdomen, the classic features of acute appendicitis. Rogozov wrote in his diary, "It seems that I have appendicitis. I'm keeping quiet about it, even smiling. Why frighten my friends? Who could be of help? A polar explorer's only encounter with medicine is likely to have been in a dentist's chair." He tried all forms of conservative management, including antibiotics and tepid sponging, but nothing worked and his condition worsened. Eventually, he realized that surgery was the only option. He wrote, "This is it. I have to think through the only possible way out, to operate on myself. It's almost impossible, but I can't just fold my arms and give up." The operation began at 2 a.m. on the 1st of May 1961. With only local anesthetic injected into the surgical site, Dr. Rogozov made a 12-centimeter incision in his own abdomen. His assistants were a driver and a meteorologist, who handed him instruments and held a mirror so that he could see inside more clearly. The doctor found that he was frustrated by this arrangement, so he ended up operating mostly by touch and without wearing any gloves. Writing about it in his diary afterward, Dr. Rogozov said, "I worked without gloves. It was hard to see. The mirror helps, but it also hinders. After all, it's showing things backwards. I work mainly by touch. The bleeding is quite heavy, but I take my time. I tried to work surely. After half an hour, Dr. Rogozov started feeling dizzy and weak, and he began to take short breaks while he worked. The helping team took photographs to record this bizarre operation, which was completed in an hour and 45 minutes. The dark color of the necrotic base of the appendix indicated just how close Dr. Rogozov came to perforation. A day later, and it might have burst. After the operation, Dr. Rogozov made a steady and full recovery. His stitches were out after 1 week, and he resumed his regular duties after 2 weeks. What an amazing story. Perhaps you have your own stories of medical misadventures and procedures you've done on yourself or on your loved ones. If you're ready to share, we're ready to hear them. If the story of Dr. Rogozov operating on himself using a mirror mirrors something that you've done in your own life, let us know. You can choose to email us at drcoffeeza@gmail.com or send a voice note or direct message via Instagram. You can choose to remain anonymous or let us know if we have permission to share your story with your name and identity on the podcast. It's that simple. The best stories received over the next 2 weeks will be featured in episode 26 of the Dr. Coffee podcast. And now to this week's special guest. Professor Ryan Blumenthal is a senior specialist forensic pathologist and associate professor in the Department of Forensic Medicine at the University of Pretoria. He has published widely in the fields of lightning, suicide, and other areas involving the pathology of trauma. He published his first article in 2004 and has since published more than 29 articles in the scientific literature. Professor Blumenthal has also been involved in the publication of several textbooks and has helped generate both national and international standard operating procedures and guidelines. His chief mission is to help advance forensic pathology services both nationally and internationally, and his life's work has been dedicated to education, critical thinking, and puzzle solving. Professor Blumenthal is also involved in collaborative research with several departments and universities. In 2020, he published a book titled Autopsy: Life in the Trenches with a Forensic Pathologist in Africa, which became a non-fiction bestseller locally. He also hosted an 8-part documentary series called Lightning Pathologist, which aired on various channels including DSTV and has been viewed by more than 2.5 million people. Both the book and the series have had a significant public health impact, and going forward, Professor Blumenthal would like to continue with his passion for the public communication of science. Professor Blumenthal's hobbies include solving puzzles, playing chess, sleight of hand magic, bird watching, mountain biking, and writing. I thoroughly enjoyed our conversation, and I'm sure you will as well. Without any further ado, here is Professor Ryan Blumenthal. Welcome to the Dr. Coffee podcast, Professor Ryan Blumenthal.
An absolute honor to be here.
Thank you so much for sacrificing some of your precious time and your Saturday morning. We're here at the Irene African Pride Resort. We've had a wonderful cup of coffee. I'm just so grateful that you're able to speak to us today about forensic pathology, but there's also so much about you as a person that we're going to dive into and unpack, so I'm excited about that. The first question we ask every single guest on the Dr. Coffee podcast is where you did your medical school training and about your junior doctor years. So where did you go to medical school?
Well, I studied 23 years. I have 6 degrees. I started off at the University of Pretoria, and then I did my PhD through the University of the Witwatersrand. Mm-hmm. My 6 degrees are MBCHB. I've got a diploma in forensic medicine. I've got my fellowship in forensic pathology through the Colleges of Medicine of South Africa. I've got my master's in forensic pathology. I did a law degree through UNISA.
Wow.
And I did a PhD in electrical engineering through the University of the Witwatersrand. 23 years.
That is incredible. And there's a lot of different fields mixed together there. So, I mean, you must have started as an intern. So where did you do internship to begin with?
Internship was in the year 2000 at Somerset Hospital in Cape Town.
Okay. And what was your internship experience like? Would you recommend Somerset as a place for internship?
Look, it was tough, I must say. I've got very hectic memories. I did basically 4 rotations through the year. So I did surgery, pediatrics, obs and gynae, and internal medicine for the year. And it was, I mean, if you think about Cape Town, it's actually a harbour town. In the pathology of trauma you see in harbour towns is fascinating. I mean, you get these shipping vessels drifting in and out of town with whatever type of pathology that it can throw at you.
Really? Yeah. And then community service, was that 1 year at the time?
So community service, I was one of the first groups to do community service, and I did it at Maputo Malachi Hospital in Palabora, which is close to Lulakani and Namakhali, and that was quite a tough year because like you're literally thrown into the trenches. I've got hectic stories from the bush there.
Was that a very different experience from being at a big metropolitan centre like a Cape Town hospital to then being out in rural, and what was the contrast like for you?
So medicine is usually see one, do one, teach one. When you're in the bush, you haven't seen one, you haven't really been taught one, you literally have to do one.
Wow.
So you learn a lot about yourself there.
Yeah. But overall, a positive experience. Did you feel at the end of your junior doctor years that you came out as a better professional?
Well, I look back now, in hindsight, what I thought I knew then and what I know now, it's actually quite scary because you don't actually know what you don't even know.
Wow.
So you really are full of bravado, and you come out of medical school and you think you know everything. Meanwhile, the years teach you doubt, and I look back now and it's quite crazy actually what I was exposed to and what I did.
Look, I would say that small measure of self-doubt keeps us responsible, it keeps us accountable, and helps us to make sure we do the right thing. You know, we're not overconfident. But do you feel that your junior doctor years scarred you or maybe gave you any fear about your abilities?
That is a very good question. You know, I look back now to my junior years, and I've got to refer you to Adam Kay's book called This Will Hurt. I think he gives an excellent account of being a doctor in the junior years. Really, there's minimal sleep, there's hierarchy in medicine. You many times out of your depth, you learn a lot about yourself. You have to learn self-reliance. You've got to learn how to handle loss. It really is the trenches.
But great preparation for what's to come. And at some points, you made the decision to then further your studies. So what was that decision like for you? And how did your decision algorithm take place? I always picture it as, you can either go physician, surgeon, or pathologist. And at some point, you made that decision to go down the road of pathology. So how did that play out for you?
Well, I need to tell you a little bit about myself. So my grandmother, Frida, was one of the first female butchers in the whole of South Africa. One of my earliest memories of her is dragging a carcass on the back of her back. I mean, she really was a tough old thing, eh? And my grandfather, Sam, he was one of the first actuaries in South Africa. So I'm actually the fused genetic material of butcher and actuary. So I'm like actually a thinking man's butcher. If you think about forensic pathology, medicine is a vast field. And people always ask me, they say forensic pathology is not really medicine. I mean, you're not like saving lives. And I disagree with them 100%. By me catching murderers, I believe that I've saved lives out there. So we are saving lives indirectly. We speak for the dead to protect the living. We are public health doctors. Forensic pathology is actually a field of tremendous scope and breadth. And we play such an important role in society. So even in the most primitive of cultures, there was always a need to find out why people die. So if someone from the tribe died, suddenly and unexpectedly, there would be questions. Is this due to an enemy from within the tribe itself, or is this due to an enemy from without the tribe? So people are fascinated about what kills them. And we need to know what's happening in society. So there's always a need for truth and justice, no matter what dispensation you live under. There is always a need for truth and justice and the administration of justice to find out why people died. So it's actually, I think, in a way, almost a higher calling than medicine.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, you straddle two worlds, you straddle the world of the living and the world of the dead, right?
Look, there's clinical forensic medicine, which is the world for the living, and there's forensic pathology, which is the world for the dead. You need the basic medical knowledge because when all is said and done, we are mammals. We get the same sicknesses that mammals get, and mammals die suddenly and unexpectedly, and we need to know what happened. We need answers to keep society safe and to keep the machine of the world running.
Wow, that's a tremendous answer, Prof. You obviously made that decision at some point to go down the road of pathology. What was the trigger for you, and how did you go about the process of starting to specialize in pathology?
Look, I think I have OCD. Actually, it's in alphabetical order. I would say I've got CDO. That's how OCD I am. And I need control. So, for example, general practice medicine can be a bit wild. You know, you've got patients coming in, casualty, ER room can be a bit wild. I like the silence and control of my mortuary. So I get the body, and that is my crime scene, and I can settle down, and I can take it slow, and I can work with meticulousness, step by step, and really apply my skills. So it's about your skills and how you apply them.
Was there somebody who had told you that that's what pathology was like?
Right, so when I grew up back in the day, we had some television programs. There wasn't CSI back in the day. We had what's known as Quincy, starring Jack Klugman, and I was quite inspired by his television program. He was a medical examiner from USA, and he was based on Thomas Noguchi, the Gooch, who did the autopsy on Marilyn Monroe, by the way, and John F. Kennedy. So I was quite inspired by, it's about truth and justice when all is said and done. It's about ultimate truth and justice, because people will always come with their versions, whereas forensic pathologists find the ultimate truth and ultimate answers to what went wrong.
So did you have any exposure as a junior doctor where you saw that there was an opportunity to pursue this in South Africa?
We got to spend 2 weeks when I was a junior in the Department of Forensic Pathology. Back then we had a mentor called Professor Loubser, and he actually wrote the book The Forensic ABC, Loubser, Swar and Olivier. It's one of the great textbooks in South Africa for forensics. And I looked at this field and it did intrigue me. Only once I'd been exposed to the rest of medicine, you'll end up where you're supposed to be. It's very personality orientated. Medicine is wide enough and large enough, and there's enough scope for every single personality. And I just think I fit best in forensic pathology.
Yes, I mean, from what you described, it definitely resonates with your personality and with your CDO, as you said.
Yes.
And like you say, you got exposure to many different areas within medicine. Were any of the other areas of medicine in any way appealing to you? Did you ever consider surgery or internal medicine or pediatrics?
Look, you need to know everything about medicine if you're going to do forensic pathology, because patients can die under pediatric surgery, under cardiothoracic surgery, under neurosurgery. So you have to know every other discipline. It really is a super speciality. For example, someone could be undergoing a very rare neurosurgical procedure and die on the table, and then I, as a forensic pathologist, have to know about that procedure and then try and find out what went wrong. So, and literally you've got to know about ballistics, you've got to know about explosives, you've got to know human psychology, you've got to know criminology. If you get bones, you've got to know osteology, anthropology. It really is the catch net for the entire medicine.
Wow. So what was the process like? I mean, what's the road in South Africa if one wants to specialize in forensic pathology? What courses does one need to do, and at what stage in your journey can you start preparing for those?
My advice would be to get all your data. You cannot make a good decision in life with minimal data. Even if you're buying a refrigerator, you need to get all your data and then you buy a refrigerator. There's only one place in life where you won't have all your data, and that is relationships. However, decision making with minimal data is dangerous. So I would say get out there, experience what medicine has to offer both locally and internationally, and then make your decision. If you are interested in it, we want the right people with the right stuff. You need the right kind of person, because you are literally spending all your days in the mortuary. You are going to eat, breathe, sleep, dream autopsies. There is no escape. Medicine is medicine. You are literally in the mud and the blood and the guts of it all every single day. It is not easy. It takes a certain kind of mindset. You need to be a professional. You've got to be unflappable. You wake up, you're in a good mood, you're in that mortuary. You wake up in a bad mood, you're in that mortuary. You know, what keeps you going on the days when you don't feel like doing it? And then nothing other than professionalism and your calling. It's got to be, you've got to ask yourself why you went into this in the first place. And my answer to this is, it's like becoming a comrades marathon runner. why are you doing Comrades Marathon? You've got to critically interrogate your motives. Are you a runner because ego? Like you want to tell people, oh, I've run Comrades Marathon? Or is it just part of your lifestyle? And literally, once you make a decision to specialize, it has to be part of your DNA. You've got to be excited to get the next journal. Like, I cannot wait for the next Illustrated Forensic Pathology Journal or American Journal of Forensic Medicine Pathology. They've got a new section now, for example, called Coming Soon to a Mortuary Suite Near You. Where they tell you what's happening on the streets. So,
like
for example,
pathology.
Yeah, if there's a new gang on the streets, a new drug, a new weapon, a new projectile,
Sure.
I cannot wait for this. Like, I get excited for the next journal.
Wow. So you did the diploma in pathology. Was that all kinds of microbiology and hematology? So broad spectrum pathology?
Look, the process to become a forensic pathologist or board certified in South Africa is very well delineated.
Okay.
So you would have to be a medical doctor first.
Sure.
You would have to have done your time for the Health Professions Council of South Africa, doing your internship and your community service.
Sure.
Then you would have to apply for a program. There are very good programs in South Africa at all the main universities, and you want to go and introduce yourself to the head of department and show them that you have real interest. We don't want people that are blanket applying, for example, to dermatology, ophthalmology, and then they can't get in and then they come to forensic pathology. That's not what we want.
That's a red flag for you.
Yeah, we want people that, as I said, the right stuff, that it's in their DNA. Then you would start in the department, and we would start you off with a diploma in forensic medicine or forensic pathology, just to get a feel. And then you do the formal registrarship, which is a 4-year course. And then after you finished, you become a board certified forensic pathologist through the Colleges of Medicine of South Africa. You get your FC Forensic Path, or what I had is that, and the MEd in forensic pathology. So it's quite a long process. You're looking at, after internship, community service, another 4 years.
Sure.
Just to become a forensic pathologist.
And then, okay, so you do the 4 years, and then I'm interested to know where you would rotate as a registrar in forensic pathology. Do you stay at one base, or do you get sent out? Because it's not like if you were specializing in surgery, you might be on the VIT circuit and you're part of 4 or 5 hospitals and you rotate through them. Not every single hospital will have a pathology or forensic pathology unit.
That is why you have to get your data. So you want to look for a good program that's got world recognition. I always say, find the best. You know, if you want to become anything in life, you find the best mentor, you find the best system, the best place with the best reputation, because you want to be the best. I demand excellence in my army of soldiers out there. So you find a place that has rotation in anatomical pathology, because anatomical pathology is so important for forensic pathology. You want rotation through chemical pathology, hematology. So you look at the system and what it has to offer. And you also get your data and see what's happening internationally. Like the best forensic pathologist in the world, I think, is in America. They got NAME, the National Association of Medical Examiners. Australia is excellent. They've got brilliant programs there. I would think, USA or Australia has got excellent forensic pathologists at the moment.
Okay, so you mentioned a couple of departments that one might rotate through. So what's the training like for a registrar? What would one do on a day-to-day basis? What would one get exposed to? And if there's anything that you feel might be maybe lacking in the experience of training in South Africa, please share.
Look, South Africa is forensic paradise. Just to give you an idea of our numbers, so we lose about 500,000 people a year in South Africa due to natural causes, whereas we lose about 60 to 80,000 people a year due to unnatural causes. These people require a medical legal autopsy. So there are 60 to 80,000 autopsies, police medical legal autopsies needed every single year in South Africa, with an average of 72,000. Currently, there are only 70 forensic pathologists in the whole of South Africa, for a population of 62 million people. So we are in desperate need of expertise. So look, you need 6 forensic pathologists per million population.
Sure.
In America, if you are a forensic pathologist, you're not allowed to do more than 250 autopsies per person per year.
And you do more than 4 times that, yeah?
South Africa, we are easily doing up to 450 to 650 autopsies per pathologist per year.
Wow.
Some mortuaries, for example, Germiston, are seeing about 4,000 autopsies per year, where I work in Pretoria, last year we had 2, 3, 4 autopsies.
Sure.
All right, for 8 of us.
Yeah.
So we
Wow.
desperately need expertise and we desperately need hands
Yeah.
for this country.
Wow.
So look, in very violent societies, you need 6 forensic pathologists per million. And in more peaceful societies, you need 1 forensic pathologist per million population. Every society on earth needs a forensic pathologist. Whether you're in the most peaceful country in the world, people will get up to mischief and they will die.
Well, as you alluded to in the introduction to this interview, you mentioned that every society has been intrigued with why do people die, how do people die. Is there anything in history that correlates to a forensic pathologist? Like did the Romans, for example, have coroners and morticians? And
There's a long history of forensic pathology, starting from 3000 BC in China, and there's always a need in every single empire, culture, to find out, for example, why a ruler died. I mean, if it's an assassination, you're going to have war. So,
yes, wow.
I've done an autopsy on a president. I was one of 6, and it was something like you've never seen. The level of detail and the protection, and but we had a whole country on the brink of war, and
Sure.
our findings were that important.
Wow. Prof, there's so much I would like to ask you about forensic pathology, but let me hone in on some of the things that you're best known for. For example, you have a program on TV called the Lightning Pathologist. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, I did my PhD at the University of Witwatersrand on lightning through the Department of Electrical Engineering, and my PhD was on the blast wave around lightning's luminous channel. So I found out that there's a blast wave that's the equivalent of like TNT around lightning's luminous channel that blows the clothes off and ruptures eardrums.
Wow.
And I try to quantify that blast wave. And then I've written a lot of articles, papers, textbooks on lightning pathology called corona pathology. And look, you cannot be involved in the field and not do public health work. So I realized that South Africans are actually quite ignorant of the dangers of lightning. I mean, we used to have
Swim in the pool
swim
when
in the
there's
pool,
thunderstorms.
yeah, rugby matches, galas, cricket, you name it.
Yeah.
And people don't realize how dangerous this thing is. It's our biggest weather killer. I mean, it kills more people consistently than floods or tornadoes. So I thought we need to do a public health, campaign.
Well, I was fascinated when I was doing a little bit of research and watching one of your episodes for this episode that South Africa actually has a particularly high incidence of lightning. In certain areas, we're one of the highest areas in the world of lightning strikes to the ground.
Correct. We lose about 80 to 100 people a year in South Africa due to lightning, and 7 times as many are struck and survive. So the chances of you actually being struck by lightning is greater than winning the lottery. Actually, just a little fact for your listeners here. The chances of you dying an unnatural death in South Africa going to buy your lottery ticket is higher than winning the lottery.
What?
That's how dangerous this country is. If you work out how many pedestrian vehicle accidents there are versus how many lottery ticket winners there are, the chances of getting killed going to buy your lottery ticket is much higher than winning the lottery.
And yet we're consistently spending money on our lotto ticket and we don't think twice before we cross the road. Wow, that's a fantastic stat, bro. So was there anything that you had experienced? I mean, do you know anyone who was struck by lightning? What was it that intrigued you and drew you towards this quite particular niche in pathology?
Well, it was about 20 years ago, because I've been a forensic pathologist for 20 years. I had a case of an adult female found dead in the veld, and her clothes were torn and tattered, and the original thinking was that this was a rape homicide case. And then only after a thorough medical legal examination did we work out this was lightning.
Wow.
So I thought to myself, wow, lightning looks like rape homicide.
Sure.
This is because the clothes were torn and tattered and there was blood coming out of her ear, and then we did the examination and there were no footprints, and there was a thunderstorm the previous day, and I did the autopsy, and then it turned out to be lightning. So then I thought, let's look at the lightning literature, and there's very scant literature.
Paucity of literature on it, eh?
And then literally I started doing all the lightning autopsies in my department, and I think all in all, direct and indirect, I looked at 90 autopsies, and I published all this. And then only once I had all my information, I realized that there's a serious blind spot, because I was seeing stuff that wasn't in the textbooks. For example, I was seeing fractures from lightning, and I was seeing pneumomediastinum, which is air behind the sternum, and I was seeing shrapnel injury, like tattooing from exploded pavements, and I thought, whoa, this is totally aberrant. And then I started looking at barotrauma with lightning, and then I did my PhD. And then I started looking at lightning safety awareness, and I realized there's no cheerleaders in South Africa. So I thought, well, if no one's going to do it, I better do it.
Yeah.
And so I started doing TV shows, podcasts, finding the right kind of people, because you need the right team. You cannot do anything alone.
Yes.
And then I found my crew for Lightning Pathologist, Walla Films, and we produced 8 episodes. It cost us about 300,000 Rand for those 8 episodes. Yeah.
But that's an investment, as you say, in public health and education and bringing awareness to the situation. And just going back to that first case where you were talking about how what looked like rape homicide actually turned out to be lightning, I'm just thinking about the impact on policing services and the resources available. What potentially would have been detectives having to go out and now open a case and investment in man hours, because you had this understanding, because of your medical training, and because you had the insight to say this is probably lightning, that actually saved a couple hundred police man hours. And I wonder, you touched on the importance of people in our world. I wonder what the response was like when you approached the University of Pretoria and said this is what you want to do your PhD on, particularly in electrical engineering. What was their response like when you said this is why I want to do my PhD?
Well, once again, I found out where the best people are. So I was fortunate enough to find an excellent supervisor, because everything in life is about your mentors. You need the right mentors in life. Everything is about mentorship. Let me tell you, you need the right people, the right team. You need people that have the right mindset. And I found Prof Ian Jandrell, who was my mentor. I mean, a great guy. He's got about 80 patents, one of the brightest guys I've met. And I was fortunate enough that they let me be accepted into their program. And I spent 8 years there shooting lightning through ballistic gel, went to international conferences, met the world's lightning community. It's been, we brought one of the largest lightning conferences to South Africa last year, RCLP.
Wow.
It's been going for about 50 years. We had about 68 countries in Cape Town last year, October.
And who would typically attend a conference like that? Would it all be engineers? Or?
Well, it's multidisciplinary. Okay. So there's everyone from engineering, medical people, railway people, weapons people, aircraft people, you name it. Lightning affects everyone on this planet.
That must be a fascinating room to sit in on.
Well, the biggest problem is finding a common language so that we all can communicate, because every single profession is a conspiracy against the laity in every other profession. So we have to literally talk each other's language. So you've got to find common ground. Yeah.
Well, it's like you said, the forensic pathologist needs to be familiar with the medical guidelines and what's good best management therapy, medical therapy for a particular condition, so that you can say whether or not there was any foul play or any mistakes that took place.
Well, a typical day in a forensic pathologist's life. So, for example, on a Monday, we've got 20 to 30 cases, and lying on the list could be anything from a multiple gunshot wound case to a SIDS, a sudden infant death syndrome, to a complex anesthetic procedure-related death on the table, to a rape homicide case, to a fetus thrown away in some dustbin, to a sudden unexplained death of someone, for example, just switching on the tap and dying, to some bones that people find, to a fatal dog bite case, to a drowning bite, to dog bite. I mean, this is what your list looks like for the day.
So, Prof, I'm interested to know, how do you not take that stuff home?
Well, that's why we need the right kind of people. It's a discipline, it's professionalism. So, for example, you can ask this question of a neurosurgeon or a cardiothoracic surgeon or a pediatrician. It's professionalism, it's how we trained. This is who we are and what we do. And if you meet a forensic pathologist, we're actually of the most, I think, positive people you can possibly meet, because I think we're very acutely aware to humanity and the human situation. We're very, for example, this is a bit egotistical, but you should talk to us about happiness. Don't talk to the psychiatrists about happiness.
Okay.
For example, we're the ones who read suicide notes. No psychiatrist reads suicide notes. Therefore, we have an entire insight into messages for the living from suicide victims that psychiatrists have no insight into.
Yeah. You see their frame of mind just before. Yeah,
and let me tell you, so I've read thousands of suicide notes. And if you ask me, there are only 3 themes that we find in suicide notes. And these are relationship, health, and work issues. Almost all human stresses can be pushed into relationship, health, and work. from your mother-in-law to your hay fever,
Wow.
can be squeezed into these three battlefronts of life. I call them the three battlefronts of life: work, health, relationships.
Yeah.
If you read suicide notes, that's what we find. They're talking about work, health, relationships. For example, when I read these suicide notes and I see these three themes, work, health, relationships, there's a very clear message that comes across to me. So there's these three battlefronts of life. And I know you're studying medicine right now, which is your work battlefront of life. And I know your head's down and you're just trying to become successful. The problem is, if you lift your head, the other battlefronts get ignored or not given enough attention. And then soon you're on the top of the mountain and you're alone and there's no one to share your success with. So what I am saying to your listeners is it's all three battlefronts of life that have to be addressed with equal artistic and creative intensity. All this effort that you're putting into medicine now, you should have to put into your relationships and your health also.
Wow.
Because if you're just studying hardcore, your health is going to go and your relationships are going to go. So my advice, and good luck to you, is to try and keep all these three battlefronts equanimitous.
Wow, that's a really, really deep answer and a profound learning that can only really come from massive, massive life experience. Prof, I want to unpack a little bit more about your book, the book Autopsy, on the front lines and the trenches of pathology in Africa. Tell us a little bit about that book and the journey to deciding, you've got something to share, something you want to write, something you want to get off your chest.
All right, so Autopsy, Life in the Trenches with a Forensic Pathologist in Africa became a bestseller. It went into 7 prints as I'm sitting here now, got translated into Russian.
That is wild.
One of the courier companies delivered it to Marion Island. A prisoner from CMAX prison actually managed to take a selfie in his handcuffs, in his orange uniform with my book that he sent to me, Bennett. The youngest person to read my book was 11 and the oldest I think was 98. I've had thousands of selfies of people holding my book on my Instagram page.
Yeah.
And Prof
Did
B
you
underscore
ever
dog magic.
imagine that you would get that kind of reach? Did
Well,
you think that's how people would take it?
I'm thrilled that Autopsy resonated with so many people. I try to pitch it not too high, not too low. I try to pitch it just like in the middle so that it wasn't too technical. I definitely had a message that I wanted to share with people because, seeing all this unnatural death makes one philosophical. And I just felt a need to just tell the public, like, hey, people, just listen to me here for 1 second.
The book obviously unpacks a little bit of some of the cases you've encountered. What are some of the themes that you communicate to your readers? And what would you say is the one takeaway that they really want to get from reading that book?
So Autopsy is about risking your life for other people's death. Because literally, when you go into that mortuary, it is by the grace of God. It is so dangerous. There are so many things that can hurt you and kill you. I've got colleagues that have been injured and died. Literally, because medicine, you're dealing with people that are exposed to extreme things, but forensic pathology, you're dealing with people that's been exposed to extreme things. So we're talking extreme infections, extreme chemicals, extreme mechanical trauma. It really is a dangerous place. There's risks and there's hazards that can hurt you. So forewarned is forearmed, and I just wanted to say that there are people out there risking their lives for other people's deaths.
Wow. So we really need to respect that about forensic pathology. It's not a soft discipline at all, although people might say, oh, the lifestyle is good. The exposure to, as you said, to contaminants, to viruses, to chemicals, to weapons. I'm thinking also about particularly the criminal element, that somebody might not want you to solve this particular riddle. There's aspects and there's risks that are different to when you're in the emergency room or that you're in your consulting room.
Absolutely. So, for example, I'm fascinated by what's happening in the world from what I see from my mortuary table. So I can tell you what's happening in the world just by seeing what comes onto my autopsy table. I can tell you if a new gang has moved into the neighborhood. I can tell you if there's a new drug, if there's... for example, can I talk about COVID when I was on the front lines? Because I was an essential worker and I was doing autopsies during COVID.
Yes. And at the front line of driving our understanding and our research into this disease. So please tell us about it.
So there were 5 things I noticed during COVID, personally, subjectively, my practice during COVID. So Look, we didn't know what this thing was. Obviously, it was like the early days of the HIV/AIDS pandemic, which is also when I started practicing. So it was very similar to me. Yes, I'm that old. I'm nearly 50. So, for example, the first thing I noticed from my mortuary, look, it was difficult. All that PPE, donning and doffing it. It was quite hectic. We didn't know what this thing was. We'd have WhatsApp groups with fellow forensic pathologists around the world.
Did you have similar experience, maybe like with Lujo or Lassa virus, where you had to don a similar level of PPE?
Yes. So obviously we didn't know what this thing was, how dangerous it was. So we, for example, couldn't use aerosolized generating procedures. Like we weren't allowed to use oscillating head saws. You had to use a manual bandsaw to take off the skull. And we had very strict protocols for donning and doffing and, how to put on our stuff and how to take it off. And then the first few cases started coming in and, it's quite nerve-wracking. And, I mean, I've dealt with high-risk autopsies in the past. So, when you get a high-profile case or a highly dangerous case, everything's exactly the same. You just got to do it slower with more attention because you cannot have mistakes. So if you're doing an autopsy on a president or a very highly dangerous or contaminated or infectious case, everything is exactly the same. You just got to work slower. This is my big message. Take your time, be very military focused, have your mise en place. You've got to have your full station. So one of the most high-risk autopsies I've ever performed before COVID was a rabies case. This you have to do on super absorbent sponge. You got to work. You need your full rabies immunoprophylaxis. You got to take out the brain and the salivary glands, which have got to go on ice to the National Institute of Communicable Disease. You cannot have any potential injurious exposures because HIV lives for 16.5 days after death.
COVID HIV lives for
16.5 days after death.
Really?
COVID 35 hours after death, and also rabies is a virus that can also exist post-mortem. There's no studies on how long it survives. So just because this body is dead does not mean it is not infectious.
Yes.
It is high-risk stuff.
Wow, that's also something important for people to understand because, as doctors in a resus, for example, we might say, oh, well, we've been resusing for 45 minutes. There's no risk of infection. But like what you're describing is that the contact precautions still apply, whether that body has been deceased for a few hours or days or they're a living patient.
Well, that's why I say it's by the grace of God you go into that mortuary every single day. You never know what you're going to find or what's going to happen. I mean, you can have fully cocked and loaded weapons fall out of pockets. You never just put your hand in a pocket. You've got to pat the pocket because there could be uncapped needles from illicit drug use in the pockets. I mean, a simple tissue in a pocket could be contaminated with coughed tuberculous blood.
Or it could be the single thing that links somebody to a scene of the crime.
Indeed. So, and then chemicals. Can I give you like a crazy chemical case here?
Absolutely. I'm finding this fascinating. It's a great discussion.
Well, if someone kills themselves with potassium cyanide, so they swallow this, it reacts with the hydrogen chloride in your stomach and forms hydrogen cyanide gas. So you could just be doing your autopsy and cut the stomach open and you can be overcome with hydrogen cyanide gas.
Wow. Yeah.
So you never know how something can hurt you. You have to be very cognizant and you always got to expect the unexpected. So my big message for the listeners is there's this machine of the world. I'm but a very small cog in this machine. I just want to keep this machine turning. There are people that don't want this machine to turn. There are people that want this machine broken.
Wow.
And we just have to keep this machine of the world running.
So, Prof, you were telling us about the 5 things that you learned about COVID. So tell us about what you discovered.
So, as I said, I'm fascinated by what's happening in the world by seeing what's happening at my autopsy suite. So during COVID, I saw 5 trends subjectively. So, for example, I saw an increase in suicides. There was definitely an increase in suicides because obviously people lost their jobs. Youngest suicide I saw at my mortuary was 7 years old. The number one method was hanging, and it was mainly people that were in corporate that I was seeing killing themselves.
Wow.
The second thing I noticed was an increase in addict-related deaths. People weren't getting their fixes. They weren't getting their alcohol. They weren't getting their drugs. So they were making their own alcohol at home, and they were dying from addict-related deaths.
Sure.
The third thing I saw was an increase in interpersonal violence. There was nowhere to run and hide. Partners were coming face to face with each other, and I was seeing deaths due to interpersonal violence.
Wow. And was it always intimate person violence, so like for a relationship?
It was lockdown. There was nowhere to go.
Yeah.
Number 4, I was seeing, for some unknown reason, an increase in motor vehicle accidents when we were coming out of lockdowns. So maybe people had lost confidence or their reflexes or road rage. Who knows why?
Forgotten how to drive.
Forgotten how to drive, yet there was an increase in road traffic fatalities as we were coming out of lockdowns.
Wow.
And the most tragic thing that I saw was an increase in skeletons and decomposed bodies, because no one was finding all the lonely people.
Wow.
So people dying in their flats and then found late. So I was doing a lot of skeletons and decomposed bodies.
Sure. That's such an interesting thing we don't really think about. I mean, I've often spoken about the impact of COVID in terms of malnutrition, seeing, because as students, we were working in pediatrics, and we were seeing these babies coming in with SAM because the mom and dad had been previously working day to day to earn enough to feed the family, and then for those 5 weeks weren't able to get work. So it's really interesting to think about these other consequences, and particularly the emergence from lockdown, how that played out with the road fatalities. That's really fascinating.
Yeah, and I don't think we've seen the end result of this yet. There were so many new perspectives and so many things happening. For example, the vaccines. We were having 200 to 300,000 a day in South Africa, and then people would normally die naturally in South Africa, and then someone would die in relation to a vaccine. Now, doing the autopsy, is this vaccine-related death or is it not? How to think about things like that. And, there were totally new perspectives and totally new things that we had to experience. So just even because you're a doctor or a professor does not mean it is the end. Your life studying does not stop when you get your diploma or your degree. That is the biggest mistake you can possibly make. Being a doctor is a lifelong learning experience. Till you are retired, and even after retirement, you've got to keep learning. When you get your certificate or your degree or your diploma, it is not the end.
Prof, before we began today's interview, you shared with me that you're very excited about a new book that's coming out. And I'm excited because you told me that this is an exclusive, that this is the first that anyone's going to hear about it. Writing one book is an achievement and an accomplishment in and of itself, particularly one that's done as well as your Autopsy book did, going to its 7th printing and being translated into another language. Tell us about this other book. Why the need to write a new book?
This new book hasn't got a name at the moment, so we're still trying to find out what to call this new book. Writing this new book has been harder than my PhD. The biggest comments I got from Autopsy was that it was too superficial, too generalist, that I didn't go into detail. So part of me thought, fine, let's go into detail. Let's see what you can handle, yeah?
Yeah.
So I thought, let's go deep down the rabbit hole.
Okay.
And I thought, let's just take the gloves off here and let me show you actually, what it's really, really like.
So is this Autopsy 2.0?
It's not Autopsy 2.0. It's actually a deep dive into a singular forensic pathological technique.
Okay.
It is a masterclass in low cards exchange principle, which is the law of interchange. Every contact leaves a trace. And I use case studies, and I show you how this influences every single aspect of your life, so much so that it even affects your happiness levels and your philosophy for growing old.
Wow. Just give it a little snippet, give it a taste to the junior doctors. How can we apply this principle in our day-to-day work as junior doctors, this contact principle as you put it?
Well, if you are mindful of low cards exchange principle, which says that every contact leaves a trace, if you go to a crime scene, you'll leave something there or you'll take something with you. That's what the public knows. There's an underground second part to low cards that we forensic pathologists know. The degree of contact depends on 3 things: duration, intensity, and nature of contact. How hard, how long, and what is the contact? And when you realize that low cards exchange principle is not only about physical evidence, but it's about everything, including data and memes and your ideas, everything, you are the end result of all your contacts you've had in life. Your contacts you've had in life constrain you, and the type of contacts you have in life will determine who you will become. So if you are very mindful of what you are coming into contact to, what you're eating, what you're drinking, the pollen grains, who your friends are, what TED Talks you're listening to, every single thing will make you who you are. because we use this evidence to catch murderers. So, for example, the Unabomber case, Ted Kaczynski, how did they catch him? He had a manifesto and he also had letters. And there was traces of himself on the manifesto and the letters, and we could link the two to each other, and we can work out this is the same author who wrote both, and that's how we caught Ted Kaczynski. Every single contact leaves a trace.
Wow, fascinating. I'm very excited to read that book. I can't wait. So when is that book due to come out?
We live in a very dangerous time. This book cannot just come out. It has to be sanitized. It has to be read by lawyers. It has to be read by colleagues. It has to be peer reviewed. Every single thing has to be looked at before this goes live. So I cannot actually give you a date.
Okay, so no, that's a very interesting thought. But I mean, as a podcaster, I generally just record the podcast and then put it out there. But when you're talking about dates and when you're talking about sensitive information, sometimes you do need to kind of reinforce yourself and just make sure that it's okay to put it out there, that kind of thing. So I appreciate the care with which you answered that question. Sorry for throwing you on the spot.
We live in an extremely litigious world. People will take you down for a single word. Anything can offend anybody. We live in a very difficult and dangerous time.
We live in the age of Twitter, where you post something and it can stay there for 10 years, and then
Correct.
somebody discovers it and goes, oh, you said this 10 years ago and that was hurtful to me because of X, Y, Z.
And we catch people off details. So it's an airy word. It's one word. That's all it takes. You have to be very mindful of everything nowadays.
So you were telling me in the break about somebody who took you on because you said the...
Yeah, well, in Autopsy, I wrote a paragraph about the quickest ways to die.
Mm-hmm.
And in my book, Autopsy, I said that some of the quickest ways you can die is lightning death, nuclear explosion. And in my book, I wrote jumping into a volcano. And I had omitted the word active volcano.
So you mean landing in lava?
Yeah,
and
you'll be
sizzle,
dead before
sizzle,
you'll be dead before you hit that lava. And some Texas paramedic took me on. I'm from South Africa. What volcanoes do I have here? How much experience do I have with volcanoes?
Yeah.
How can I make such a comment?
Yeah.
So I'd left out the word active, and I was taken down for that.
Sure. Yeah, but I mean, sometimes you do see where people are coming from, and you say like, okay, fantastic, I left out one word. Does that make it better if I say active, So I'm sure that there have been times in your career where you've had to deal with people's sensitivities, people's reactions to some of your findings. Have there ever been times where you have been appalled at people's reactions?
Forensic pathologists have to deal with the extremes of life. We deal with homicides, accidents, suicides. I mean, these are extreme life events. And also we have to do autopsies on killings that may be mafia related or politically related, and you really need pachydermatic outer skin covering to deal with this.
Pachydermatic.
That is the word.
Thick skin, yeah.
Thick skin, because literally, if you're doing a hot potato case is one that no one wants to touch. There are cases where, authorities have died, and then you're doing the autopsy. And we live in a very violent society, so it can get quite scary at times, yeah.
Prof, you had this paramedic from Texas, from America, which you've previously alluded to America being a great place to study forensic pathology, and they have great resources and they have great academics, obviously. But he felt like he could call you out. As a professor, as a paramedic, he was calling out the professor and saying, oh, you don't know what you're talking about. How does forensic pathology and our training in South Africa compare with the rest of the world? And would somebody who specializes in forensic pathology here be able to take their skills to another country if they chose to work and live in another place in the world?
The world has changed a lot. We have technology now. What COVID pandemic taught us is, who is your expert? Can you trust this expert? Who is saying this? Can we trust them? On what basis are they saying this? So anyone can call out anyone. And that is a great place to be in the world, because in the past we had very paternalistic, I'm the big doctor and I say this, and there's like, these are gods and goddesses that are out there that you may not challenge, and this is a scary place to be when there's totalitarian, but if you're on some lonesome stretch of highway and that paramedic is the only person to treat you. Trust me,
Yeah.
your hands are in this person's life.
Yeah.
And
Your
if
life
you-
is in their hands.
Yeah, and if you're in some small town and that's the doctor there, literally you are in their hands.
Correct.
And I got this thing called the universe of theory. So
Okay.
you get these academic centers of excellence, and then the further away you go from these academic centers of excellence, the more wild it gets in the periphery. So, for example, if a forensic autopsy is done in some small town, it may not be a gourmet autopsy. It may be a peekaboo autopsy, which is going to affect justice. And who hangs out in these small towns is tourists and places. And if they
Yes.
die there, they're at the mercy of the local jurisdiction.
Yes.
So too, if someone dies on a small island or somewhere else in Africa, can you trust their forensic resources? And this is where it gets very exciting, interjurisdictional forensics. You know, if a South African dies in a neighboring African country, how do we manage this? Can we trust their forensic system? And what happens if a person from a first world country dies in South Africa? Can they trust our forensic system? And the world is now a global village, and we have to think in terms of forensic excellence globally. And we want something that is so good that it is beyond interference. Like, you need to know that this system is beyond reproach. Can be trusted. And that is what it's about at the end of the day.
So is our training here good enough that you could say to any one of your trainees that you've mentored and taken through your program that they could then go and get a position overseas?
Earlier on, I said that this is forensic paradise. Our numbers are extreme here. So what we see is a dream. The practical experience you'll get here in South Africa is beyond anywhere else. You've got to find the right mentor in life. I said you need to find the right supervisor. You need to do your research, get your data, and you need to be able to study where you feel you'll get the best kind of training. So do your research, get your data.
And earlier on, you also mentioned that there's essentially 70 or so forensic pathologists working in the country. I don't imagine that there's much distinction between like private and public as there would be in other areas of medicine.
There are 5 private forensic pathologists in South Africa. The rest of us work for the state. I think things are going to change. There's going to definitely be private-public partnerships taking place in the future. There is a need for it. Definitely, if you demand a state-of-the-art gourmet autopsy, what's stopping you from getting it? Mm-hmm. And I think the field is changing. If you go to America and you go, for example, to Maryland or Texas and you take a look at those mortuaries, it will blow your mind. So in Maryland, Professor Dave Fowler's in charge there. This building has got a parking lot, and these parking lots have got concrete pillars, and there's copper wires around these concrete pillars. Mm-hmm. And you look at this and you think, what is this about? Have you any idea? What do you think this is?
Well, I would imagine it's got something to do with electromagnetism.
It's actually got to do with mass disasters. If there's a mass disaster in Maryland, the parking lot becomes a massive mortuary where you can work and do autopsies. It becomes a fridge.
Wow.
And there's one copper pipe for boiling water so you can make coffee while you work. And the upper floor is called Scarpetta House, donated by Patricia Cornwall. And they've got a normal bedroom, a normal bathroom, a normal kitchen. And you have actors that pretend to be dead, and they teach you how to do scene investigation when you go to one of those rooms. And then in Texas,
yeah.
The mortuary there is pure glass. Okay. Designed by an architect where it's illusionary. So you can work in total privacy, and yet you can see through everything. You have to actually experience this to believe it. The mortuary is like almost all glass. So we are out of the basement. The paradigm's changed. Forensic pathology is a first world profession now.
Wow. That's intriguing. So what's the vibe like between the 70 pathologists? Do you interact well? Is it quite collegial? Or is it something that you do very much alone? I mean, imagine you've got your case, you obviously have to focus during that time. But do you share cases with each other? Besides obviously conferencing and things like that, do you have a good relationship with those other pathologists in the country?
That is an excellent question. And I must say, what makes us so great here in South Africa is we all talk to each other. There's no, bad vibes. We all on the same page.
Is there skill sharing? Like you're known as the lightning guy and there's somebody else who's the gunshot guy?
Yes, definitely. There's different pockets of excellence, and we've got very strong, we've created a thing called SAFS, the South African Academy of Forensic Sciences. We've got academic meetings that are now like national. We've also got AFSA, the African Forensic Science Academy, which is for Africa. We all know each other. It is like a brotherhood or a sisterhood. We all know who's who in the zoo, and we're a phone call away from each other, and that's what it should be like. You know, there are countries in the world where they do not talk to each other, where there's definite, they're not as cohesive as we are in South Africa. I think, you know, what happens in South Africa is because we all deal with the same stuff, and you get this kinship, you get this bond. You know, no one else can understand except ourselves what we're doing. So it's an immediate, it's like being almost in the Foreign Legion in a way. Like we just are a certain type of person that we know what we have to do.
Yeah. Prof, I think you've done a fantastic job being an ambassador and a representative of the forensic pathology subspecialty. I want to take you a little bit of a dive into your own personal life, your own personal background, if I may. On your bio that's available online, you mentioned that you do a little bit of magic, sleight of hand, and how did you get into that? That's such an interesting hobby to have.
Yeah, thank you for that. So when I was a student, I helped with my funding by doing magic at restaurants. So every Friday night and Saturday night I worked at some popular restaurants in Pretoria and Cape Town, and I've also been to, I think, about 7 World Magic Champs, which is called FISM, the Federation Internationale Society Magician. I've been to the Society of American Magicians. I get the magic journals. It's my huge hobby, and I think it ties in very nicely with forensic pathology because, you know, to catch a criminal, you have to think like a criminal. And sleight of hand magic is almost about deception, and it's about perception, and it's how people see things. So in my book, Autopsy, I talk about the perfect murder. And actually, when I was writing this, I was actually writing about the perfect magic trick. So when you're doing the perfect magic trick, you actually have to assume they know all the methods. So too with the perfect murder. You have to assume they know all the methods. There's a thing called simulacrum of the norm. So if you see someone just deal a card normally, it looks like they're just dealing a card normally. Meanwhile, it could be a second deal or a third deal. And in the perfect murder, there's what's known as the simulacrum of the norm. They can make it look like a suicide or make it look like a normal hanging or a normal death. So you've got to look beyond the superficial. So you've got to assume they're cleverer than you. You've got to assume they know all the methods. And you've got to know what's out there. And so the two are very similar in my mind. And we have picked up some crafty murders over the years. And I must say, I think it's the way of thinking that helps you.
There must be an immense sense of satisfaction, not only when you pull off a sleight of hand magic trick that amazes people, but also when you solve a crime and you manage to catch a murderer who thought that he was able to outsmart you.
I've had some interesting cases over the years. Maybe I can leave your viewers with 2 that were in the book. So one was a cash in transit murder, and literally I went through their good luck charms, and I found something in their good luck charm that led me to see that this was an international terrorist group. So, and it's just by noticing and being detailed. You know, I literally took the time to open up their good luck charms and look inside, and I found something which led us down a path to find out that this was actually part of an international terrorist group.
Wow.
And they were actually funding the international terrorist group through cash and transit robberies in South Africa.
Here in South Africa.
Yeah. That was the one case that I'm quite proud of.
You mentioned 2. Is there a second one that you can share, or on second thoughts are you not at liberty to disclose?
Yeah, there's been quite a few, so I'm just trying to think here which one I can share with the audience. Yeah, so you, like a hanging case, you get typical hanging cases and atypical hanging cases. And the secrets of the masters, the way to tell if it's a real hanging or not, is actually from a piece of evidence that is invisible to the public. They would never find this. They would not know about this if you don't look for this. And it's something called the saliva trail, a dried rivulet of saliva on the shirt, or on the top of on the pants or on the shoe. This means they were alive at the time of hanging. So if we see that saliva trail, that is great news for us. This means this is hanging. If it's absent, then this is possibly an atypical hanging, and it could be homicide. So just by finding what's not there, you can pick up that this is murder.
Wow. What I'd like to ask is, where do you see forensic pathology going? Now, obviously, technology is a massive factor. I'm not sure if you use artificial intelligence in any way. I can imagine that there's been profound improvements in things like your microscoping power, your processing time at the laboratory. DNA and genomics has opened up a whole new world of forensics. But what advances are on the horizon, and how do you see forensic pathology changing as a career in 10 to 15 years? Now, obviously, I realize that's a very big question, so take your time to answer however you feel fit. But there will be people listening to this podcast that in 10 to 15 years will now be forensic pathologists. What do they have to look forward to?
Well, I'm going to go back in time when I was a doctor, walking the wards. I had my doctor's case with all my books. I had all my books. It was heavy. And literally at 2 a.m, I would have to crack open my books and try and work out what was going on when I was an intern 20 years ago. Now it's on your phone. You can just Google it. So already things have changed dramatically. So let me tell you what's some of the new stuff happening in forensics. There is devastating new technology. We've got new facial recognition software. We've got laboratories on a chip. So if you go to a death scene and you find blood, you can literally scoop it up and phenotype this on site. So I can say that the owner of this blood has got blonde hair and blue eyes on site.
Wow.
There is drones now, so you can go. You no longer have to walk into a death scene. You fly the drone in, and it's got different lighting, so you can find everything. We've got smart dogs now, like University of Pretoria has got Smooth, the smart Boston Dynamic type dog. They can walk into a hazardous scene and out without causing risk to us humans. And the most scary thing that I need to tell you about is we live in a dangerous new world. There's a thing called homicide by cell phone. So you can actually hack a medical device with your cell phone. So someone's on an insulin drip, and then you can hack that drip and they can get an overdose of insulin. So now they have to make hack-proof medical devices. Wow. This is the world we're going into.
Yeah.
We've got to be mindful of this stuff. And you talk about AI. I mean, you've seen this new chat, what's it called? Chat GTC, this new artificial program that can write reports for you, etc. Forensic pathology has to be flexible and accommodate changes in technology. When I started practicing, there were almost 20 million less people in South Africa. When the textbook Forensic ABC by Schweier, Loebsch and Olivier was written in 1988, there were far less humans in South Africa than there are now. And almost nothing has changed in infrastructure. We've still got almost the same amount of hospitals, almost the same amount of tertiary institutions. We've only got about between 60 to 90 forensic pathologists in South Africa that are retired or not retired. So we're going to definitely have to rethink how we do things. We're going to have to try and bring in technology. We're going to have to work smarter, cleverer. I'm burning out. I mean, this workload is extreme. We have to be very mindful of working smarter, cleverer. I often think to myself, is there a way to take a human body through some kind of machine that will video and record and biopsy and get all the evidence, and give us like something at the end? Because an autopsy, a medical legal examination, is incredibly labor intensive. If you do it properly, if you see what goes into one medical legal investigation to catch a murderer, it is intense.
Roughly, what's the time frames like 2 or 3 days, a week?
We've caught someone after 19 years.
What?
Yeah.
But I mean,
cases.
How much time on autopsy? How much time are you examining a body?
Well, that answer is it depends. It depends on the nature of the case. And if you see what's happening internationally and you see what's happening here, and with backlogs and trying to keep up to date, so it's a constant thing that has to be addressed at all times.
Wow. Prof, we're coming to the end of the interview, like I said, and I want to give you an opportunity to communicate a lesson that you learned through your career in medicine, or something that you think is important for medical students and junior doctors. I mean, you've mentioned a lot in this interview. You've given us some important tips for life, rules for life, some guiding principles. You've basically been a professor in this interview, and it's clear that you are passionate about what you want to relay to the audience. But just some final thoughts, anything that you'd like for us to know. And this could be some motivation, could be some encouragement, it could be some correction if we've been doing things badly. So maybe you're getting some cases that are coming to for autopsy where you're saying, look guys, you're not dripping well, you're not doing your CVPs well, or something like that. What is it that you can relate to junior doctors?
Wow. Look, medicine is a lifelong career. when you're young, you're a consumer. Then you become part of the machine of the world. And then once again, when you get old, you're a consumer once again. So you guys are going to be working on the machine of the world. You're going to be a little wheel, a little cog in a massive machine. You've got to keep this machine turning. You've got to do the best you can. There are times when the road is going to seem impossibly rough, and you're going to be dealing with hectic stuff. You know, forewarned is forearmed. Here's what I would say to the students. So the Marines had a group of students, and they trained them, and they didn't do well. And then they changed one thing in their training, and the next group of Marines did much better. This is what I will share. This is from the book Warrior Mindset. It's by an ex-Marine. So the first group of Marines were trained, and they went into the world, and then stuff happened. For example, they were exposed to explosions or warfare, and they came off the field with post-traumatic stress and whining and moaning and crying and destroyed for life because they were trained wrong. How I train my students is off this Warrior Mindset book, which says, when this, then that. When you're in the field, if you get hit by shrapnel, you can expect to feel this, this, and this. And that group of Marines never experienced post-traumatic stress. They never ended up whining, moaning, crying, or complaining. They were still functional parts of the machine. So you need to know that medicine is smelly, it's dirty, it's messy. My days are in the mud and the blood and the guts of it. This is what you chose to do. It's by choice that you chose this road, which is sometimes almost impossibly rough. And you have to remind yourself the reasons why you chose this road. And if you know that this road is tough, then you should be able to handle the toughness of it. It's not post-traumatic stress disorder. I'll call it pre-traumatic stress disorder. When this, then that.
Creating a realistic expectation so that when you counter those situations, you actually know exactly how to react.
How you go into something in life is more important than the thing itself. So, for example, just a little story here. If you just put up a drip in someone's arm and walk away, and the next morning that drip tissues, you've got a very unhappy person there. They want to sue you, they want to sue the system, they want to sue the hospital. If, however, you take a little time and you put that drip in and you explain why you're putting this drip in, and you tell them, listen, this drip can jump out of the vein and it can tissue. You know, you're going to get water under the skin here. And if this happens, all you do is you call the sister or you call me, you know, and we will fix this. The next morning you've got a happy uncle, a happy aunt. There's no problem because you've taken the time to explain what you're doing. So too, if you're going for some weird, wacko, cray-cray machine, you know, if I just put you in that machine and I don't tell you what you can experience, you know, if there's going to be a doof, 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 doof sound, if I haven't pre-psyched you for this, you're going to have a terrible experience. You're going to freak out. So how you go into something in life is so important. So my message actually for everyone is go into this field right. You know, get your data. Speak to those who've climbed the mountain before you. Because when you get to the top of the mountain and you're lonely, you've got to speak to people that have done the climb before you and how they cope with it. And what do you do once you've got to the top? What's the next mountain? How are you going to manage this? So speak to those that have climbed mountains before you.
Professor Ryan Blumenthal, it has been an absolute honor to have you on the podcast. You have shared gold with our audience. And I just want to thank you once again for making yourself available. Thank you, sir.
Only a pleasure.
Well, that's it for this week's episode of the Dr. Coffee Podcast. Thank you to our special guest, Professor Ryan Blumenthal. I hope you enjoyed it and feel motivated, encouraged, and inspired. If you have feedback on what you thought of this episode or anything else on your mind, please get in touch. The podcast's email address is drcoffeeza@gmail.com. That's drcoffeeza with no punctuation marks. We're also on Instagram and YouTube with the username @drcoffeeza. We'll also be on other social media platforms soon, as Knox adds immense value in this role in future, so look out for that. A reminder to send us your stories of medical procedures you've performed on yourself for a chance to be featured on episode 26 of the podcast, and also a reminder that you can find links to everything mentioned in this episode in the show notes on whatever platform you're listening on. While you're there, please leave a rating or review of the podcast. Consider sharing this episode with fellow junior doctors and medical students in your world who you think would benefit from the content and enjoy it. Thank you so much for your support.